America, bonjour, hi Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening, especially welcoming our new affiliate in Amsterdam, Schenectady, New York, our new affiliate on the west side of Rhode Island. All of you, welcome. If you're anywhere from Venice Beach to Naples in Florida, and that means you, Fort Myers, batten down. It is a 155 mile per hour winds headed your way, which is just under Category 5 as Ian approaches your coast. I'm joined by Michael Shear, two-time Pulitzer Prize winner from the New York Times, White House correspondent for the New York Times. Good morning, Michael. Aren't you glad you're not on the hurricane beat?
Oh man, I was down in Florida during Andrew 20 some years ago. I'm happy not to be there again. That's for sure.
I began the show by telling people my brother-in-law had a house in Homestead when Andrew hit, and all that was left was a toilet and a wall. It was amazing, the most brutal thing I've seen. So. Yeah. Good luck to these people. Michael, I want to talk to you about your article yesterday, updated last night. Biden is hoping small changes go a long way on immigration. Look, the size of the problem is immense. Would you explain to people the small ball that Joe Biden is proposing? I'm going to quarrel with you a little bit, but always aware that Michael's one of the good guys. He tries to get it right, but I got to quarrel with him. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, so quarrel away when after this. I mean, I think, look, the immigration system has been having problems for decades. Presidents in both parties have struggled to deal with it. It's multifaceted. There are problems on the other side of the border in terms of what is driving people to leave their homes and try to come to this country. That involves global migration patterns. It involves the economic and political fortunes of people far from here. And then when people do come, there have been problems for decades in what we do with them and how we deal with the number of people that come over. And one of those problems, doesn't solve the whole thing, but one of those problems has been how fast can you deal with the asylum process? Somebody comes over and says, hey, I claim asylum. I want to live in the United States because I'm being persecuted in my own country. That decision and other immigration decisions have taken so long over the years that, that when a person claims asylum, it can take 4, 5, 7 years before that case is finished. And in the meantime, where do you put the people? Do you let them go? If you let them go while they're kind of awaiting the outcome of their case, what happens to them? Do they get to work? If they don't get to work, do they become, sort of more of a problem in our society? All of those questions have been problems. And what Biden has done is try to speed that asylum decision-making up. It won't solve everything, but they're, I think, hoping that over the long run, that could at least solve a part of the problem.
Fairly stated. I want people to understand the number of asylum seekers run anywhere from 25 to 50% of the number of migrants who cross the southern border. So if we have 2.2 million in this fiscal year, which I think is a fair number. Do you agree with me, Michael? About 2.2 million expected this year, fiscal year end of this month?
Yeah, some of those people are, some of that 2.2 million are people who are probably the same person who's tried to, come back and forth a couple of times. So it's not an exact number of people, but it's about that.
Yeah, it's a record. Now, I have a small quarrel and a large quarrel. My small quarrel is, and this is, by the way, it falls in the category whenever I write a column for the Washington Post, the comments fill up with people, why didn't you write about this? Why didn't you write about that? I'm not trying to do that to you because it's not, I think that's an illegitimate request. Why didn't you write about this? But you said, thus far, the changes are tiny. Quote, only 99 people since the end of May have completed what are called asylum merits interviews with the asylum officer and fully evaluated under new rules. Of those, 24 have been granted asylum, while most of the rest have had their cases sent back to the immigration court system for an appeal. Nothing on how long an appeal takes or whether or not they've done anything, because the first adjudication is never the last adjudication in this system. I worked with this system fairly closely for many years in Southern California on behalf of people. I was on the Orange County Children and Families Commission for 17 years. I know all about people coming to the country without permission. If they don't fix the appeals, they haven't fixed anything, Michael. Have they done anything on the appeals process?
So part of the reason that I didn't go into a lot of detail there is because they don't have many numbers yet. They just started this at the end of May. So what happened to the 50, 60 some odd people? They say that those people, if they were denied asylum by the asylum officer in this interview, they say they'll go back into the backlog system, but they claim it will be months, not years, because essentially they'll go to the front of the line, and that the court system will be expedited because they will have already had this sort of interview taken place by the asylum officer. I share your skepticism. I mean, if they ramp this up and instead of 99 people, it's 9,900 people or more going through the system, this could become just as clogged as the last one. I mean, I do,
So-
and I think a lot of people share that skepticism.
So my minor quarrel is, okay, the appeals is not elucidated, but also you ought to, or your editor ought to have moved up the context. The backlog in the immigration court system is accrued with 1.9 million pending cases, up from 150,000 in 2001. Of those, about 750,000 are asylum cases. So you're telling me that they handled 99 in June, July, August, and most of September, and there are 750,000 more. It's not a story. So that's quarrel number one. Quarrel number two, the bigger one. This is my major quarrel. There's a paragraph in your story. In some communities where jobs are going unfilled, people have welcomed the influx of migrants looking for work. Which communities, Michael Shear?
Well, I'll give you an example. I did a bunch of stories when the Afghan refugees came, when the President Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, pulled out of Kabul. I traveled to Fremont, California, which has a little community called Little Afghan, where lots of Afghan folks have resided for years. That's one place where everyone I talked to said, "My God, we need these people because we can't hire." Restaurants are closing because they can't get enough, workers to staff them. Fargo, North Dakota is another place where I almost went. I didn't have a chance to actually go, but talk to people in Fargo. This was, last summer, so a year ago. But the labor market is incredibly tight. That doesn't mean that, that it is the same everywhere across the country. But if you look at where the unemployment rate is and where help wanted ads are, I think it is fair to say that even in some Republican communities, even places with Republican mayors, they are, they're desperate for workers.
Michael, I gotta disagree with you. I don't think it's fair to say in some communities where jobs are going unfilled, people have welcomed the influx of migrants looking for work in the context of a story about the southern border. Afghan asylum seekers aside, because they've been welcome in many communities, and I know that to be a fact, you're correct. I don't think you could find one mayor, one city council, one police department to say, yes, we want the southern migrants to come here. Now, they go somewhere. I know exactly where they go. They go to Santa Ana, has the highest population per capita of Mexican migrants of anywhere in the United States who have come in from Mexico without papers. We take care of them. Orange County does a very good job. Nobody wants more, Michael. That sentence suggests, as did one of the Sunday News show, that this is good for America. I don't think it is. I think unregulated migration is a disaster for these people and for America.
Well, look, I think you rightly indicate that there is a big debate, and I didn't mean with that sentence to suggest that it's a non-controversial thing and everybody is welcoming these migrants with open arms. That is for sure not the case. I will say, though, that I don't know that your opinion is shared entirely by everyone across the country. I think there are lots of places out there where if these people arrive in a coordinated fashion, if they're not simply sort of dumped on communities with no ability to sort of take care of them, that there are communities that are not only kind of welcoming of them, but understand that they're part of the U.S. economy and that they do play a role. I mean, that's generalizing. And
Michael, if that's true, I would have welcomed the facts to support it. Now, John Cornyn's coming on later. He's already retweeted your article. And I said, well, you'll have a chance to comment on him. I'm going to go to that sentence and say, if you're going to make that assertion, you have to. Your editor ought to have obliged you to name some communities. Am I right about that? I mean, you said some communities. Don't we need a fact?
That's fair. It was a long piece, and
Oh, it's an interesting piece. Yeah.
Thank you. A couple of examples would have been good, and I take the criticism.
All right, well, see, that's why I like talking to Michael Shear. You can bust my chops the next time you're on, Michael, about something that I say. Something about, for example, the Cleveland Browns going perfect season. Michael Shear, thank you. Follow him on Twitter, Shear M. I'll be talking about this article with John Cornyn. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. We will continue wall-to-wall coverage of Hurricane Ian on the Salem News Channel station or affiliate. Mike Gallagher will pick it up. It'll be on the Salem News Channel app as well and on the Salem Radio Network throughout the day. I'll update you tomorrow. I'm joined now by Senator John Cornyn of Texas. I know that a number of hurricanes have hit Texas over the years, so he'll be standing ready to help Senators Rubio and Scott as the need arises. Senator Cornyn, am I right about that?
Absolutely, Hugh.
Let me turn then to the immigration story. I had Mike Shear on earlier this morning. He's a friend of mine. I went through the story with him, and I talked to him about my problems with it. My biggest problem is this line. In some communities where jobs are going unfilled, people have welcomed the influx of migrants looking for work. There is no community cited. You're from a border state. This is the great line on the left now. You saw it on the Sunday shows. Oh, we have a labor shortage. An open southern border is helping us. Is that true? And if so, which communities are applauding the arrival of undocumented migrants?
Well, first of all, legal immigration, I think, has been one of the keys to American prosperity and to keep our country growing and remain the kind of place where people do want to come and pursue their dreams. Illegal immigration is a disaster because it's completely uncontrolled. You have a hodgepodge of people who range from asylum seekers to economic migrants to drug runners to criminals, and they don't really differentiate. The Biden administration with their open borders policy. They admit there's a problem with our asylum system, but they actually propose to make it worse. They propose to expedite the entry of migrants into the United States, place them into the interior. Under the law, they are not authorized to work, even if they're awaiting their asylum court date, which may be years off. But that's a completely backward approach. Because we have labor shortages, increasing illegal immigration is not the answer.
And Michael, accept it as fair, my critique. Look, if you're going to say that, hey, this is the answer to our labor problems, and some communities are labor shortages, and some communities are welcoming undocumented migrants, you've got to name the communities. And he didn't name it. And he admitted that's fair. I just think this is a narrative that, oh, don't worry about immigration. It's going to save us. You know, we got people shortages everywhere, which are a complicated combination of the impact of COVID relief plus inflation, but it's not going to be solved by an open southern border, Senator.
Absolutely. And, one thing the left does not acknowledge is the same open borders that allowed 2.3 million people to enter our country last year allowed the drugs that killed 108,000 Americans, including 71,000 overdose deaths as a result of fentanyl poisoning. And these are distributed by the street gangs that vie for territory and market share and who are responsible for much of the crime and gun violence in places like Chicago and elsewhere.
So my last question.
Their view is very, very, very selective.
This is an article, the headline at least, of which Michael didn't write, is a cheerleading article for Joe Biden. About small changes go a long way. It's about 99 people who since May have completed the asylum merits interview. At the back of it, at the very end of it, the backlog in the immigration court system is 1.9 million pending cases. About 750,000 of those are asylum cases that have been pending 5 years or longer. Why in the world is the New York Times writing about 99 cases heard in June, July, and August? It's insane.
It is. And Hugh, one question I think needs to also be asked. There's because of the way that unaccompanied children are handled under our law, they're placed with sponsors in the interior of the United States. Ask the Biden administration if they know where those children are today or what's happened to them. And I bet they will tell you they don't know because they do not follow up. And they don't know whether they've been forced into labor or sex trafficked or recruited into gangs or neglected or abused. It's a disaster.
We need Herschel to win, Dr. Oz, J.D. Vance. We need Adam Laxalt in Nevada and Blake Masters in Arizona and Tiffany Smiley in Washington State, and especially Joe O'Dea in Colorado, because we need the committees back, Senator.
Absolutely.
We got to ask these questions.
Absolutely. We need to do rigorous oversight of the Biden administration because they're, frankly, this is a prime example. They are out of control. And Secretary Mayorkas says the border's secure. He knows that's false. He admits in that same article that we've been talking about that the asylum system's broken and requires legislation, but the Biden administration has refused to engage with people like me and Senator Sinema on our bipartisan Border Solutions Act, which would be a modest step in the right direction.
Senator John Cornyn, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for joining me in a time.
Hugh, how are you? Sorry
I'm
about
great.
that.
I want to ask you about inflation on the campaign trail. The president spent $400 billion on student loans. Inflation has now got home loans at 7%. Do people put together $400 billion giveaway with inflationary impact? Because they are connected.
They're definitely connected, and I think people are smart enough to put it together. I think generally the thing that I hear is just, look, people realize that 2 years ago we had pretty stable inflation. And, for those of us who are under 40, we've really never seen inflation in any meaningful sense our entire lives. And so I think a lot of us are just saying, look, clearly something happened the last couple of years. It's the student loan issue. It's the energy crisis. It's the borrowing and spending. It's some combination of all these things. But it's just ridiculous for Biden to try to run away from it because when he took over, we didn't have an inflation crisis, and now we do. So clearly policy is having some effect.
Well, and it manifests itself. You're right about being under 40. I'm 66. I remember it all too well because when I came out of college and was living on a first job salary, it was tough. I mean, you didn't even go to McDonald's. So, JD, you're out on the campaign trail. People are paying 13% more this summer for food, this fall for food than they did a year ago. That's crushing to the middle class.
That's exactly right. And I'd say, it's funny that the three big buckets I hear about are, energy, broadly speaking, especially home utility bills. Obviously, gas has come down a little bit. Still hear a little bit about that. I hear a lot about food prices, people cutting back on various things. People buying, white bread instead of hamburger and hot dog buns, just like very basic ways of penny pinching when money gets tight. The other thing that I hear a ton about, Hugh, right now is is home prices, right? So even though a lot of people are not renters, a lot of people are not buying new homes. Obviously, they're sort of in the homes they bought a couple of years ago or 5 years ago or whatever. They at least know somebody who's gone out to the rental market, who's gone out to the home buying market. And it is just unbelievable how much housing costs compared to what it cost 2 years ago. So I hear that a lot, especially with parents who have kids going to college, returning for the semester, getting a new apartment, and realizing that it is just an unbelievably crushing part of the budget.
You're a graduate of the Ohio State University, undefeated at 4-0, and I know you're in love with the shoe as everyone else is, but I would hate to be a student at Columbus. 64,000 people go there, I think. They've all got to find an apartment. I can't imagine what it costs to live near the central campus of OSU right now.
Yeah, I can't either, Hugh. And I mean, I remember when I went to Ohio State, I just got out of the Marine Corps. 4 or 5 of us could split a house at $300 a person. And I just think that if it's a third, I think it's probably 3 times more expensive for students right now. And if you look at the statistics, Hugh, I mean, it's kind of amazing how much the Columbus market in particular, I think that it's the second or third hottest real estate market in the entire country, which again just crushes the middle class. It crushes young people trying to buy a first home. And this is a crisis we really have to wrap our minds around because, the founding fathers recognized, I think, like just a core part of the American identity is that we wanted to be an ownership society. Well, if people can't afford to live in a home, then we're not going to be an ownership society for much longer.
I used to tell people, go to Columbus. If you want to buy it, put your flag down. Go to Columbus, go to Dayton, maybe go to Warren Youngstown. 98.9 is my Columbus affiliate, and that people remember me going there and said, this is the best place in the world to buy a house. I don't know that people can. Intel's coming in. That's a big win for Mike DeWine. It's a big win for Ohio. The new, successinohio.com is their new website. That's great. But if you can't buy a house because the interest rate, I mean, JD, I don't know if you bought a house. Your mom kind of lived hand to mouth. I don't know if she ever owned a house or mama or any of them owned a house. But you can't buy a house right now for under 7% a year. And I just think this is all Biden's fault. It is all Biden's fault.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hugh. And it's, my mom actually, we got her into a house a few years ago, and she's doing very well. I appreciate you asking. But if you look at just where these rents are, it's amazing. It's not something the media talks a lot about because, of course, New York's prices have always been expensive. But I think if you live in these areas in the heartland, you're noticing it because I've told people the exact same thing, Hugh. I've told people that if you want a middle class life, you can have it in Ohio. You don't have to pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month for a decent apartment. But the amount that rents have skyrocketed, it's really made the middle class lifestyle less available to all of us living in Ohio. And obviously, I'm not going to complain for myself. I'm doing fine. But I think about kids who are in a similar circumstance to what I was 20 years ago. And my God, we're in a tough spot.
JD, I also tell people, Ohio's got one of the great unsung state university systems. You went to the Ohio State University. There's Miami of Ohio. There's Bowling Green. There's Kent State. I'm forgetting other ones. They got great universities. I don't know if they're affordable anymore. They used to be where you went. And I imagine the GI Bill covered your Ohio State and Yale Law School. Did that help, or did you have to wait for Joe Biden to forgive your student debt, or have you paid that off?
No, that's exactly right. I used the GI Bill to go to both Ohio State and to Yale Law School. And look, the issue with our universities these days, Hugh, is that they are so preposterously expensive, and it's not because the quality of the education has gone up. I hate to say it, Hugh, maybe the quality of the education has gone down, but certainly if you look at administrator salaries, if you look at some of the overhead of running universities, they've just blown up. And I think that, it's because of the way the government has treated student loans, I think, for the past 20 or so years. They've given these colleges massive incentives to raise prices. And this is maybe the biggest hidden cost of the student debt forgiveness. Obviously, I think it's unfair, just ridiculous to ask those who didn't go to college to pay for those who did. But it also gives the colleges further incentive to keep on jacking up tuition. And if you look at college tuition rates, they're one of the most inflated things that we've seen in the last 20 years.
Yeah, 100% correct. Now, JD, Mike Braun was on. 4 years ago, Mike Braun never led a public poll. He won by 6 points. And I believe 5-6 points ought to be added to every poll. Mike DeWine in one poll is up by 23 points. I suspect you're up double digits. But I don't believe polling will change at all until the last week when they'll try and actually get close, and then they'll claim they were close. But it's not close. I mean, I know you're running through the tape. I know you're campaigning every day, and people probably need to send you money to make sure you keep up with the Democratic super PACs. But I just don't think it's close. What do you think?
Tim, I know you know Tim, and so I won't bash him on your show, Hugh. But
thank you.
I think that the energy on the ground here in Ohio is all for us. I think that you're absolutely right. The polls radically understate performance, especially with candidates that the media has decided are objects of their attack. Because I think a lot of people are going to say, "Look, I'm not going to answer a pollster question if the media is telling us that we shouldn't be voting for this guy." And so you see that with a lot of Republican voters all across the country. You certainly see it here in the state of Ohio. We have to remember that Trump was supposed to lose Wisconsin by somewhere between 11 to 17 points in 2020. He was supposed to lose Ohio by somewhere between 1 to 2 points in 2020. And, of course, he won Ohio by 8. So I think there is a problem here with the pollster model. But I also think, look, Tim has had the airwaves to himself. We have just now in the last couple of weeks really stepped up our presence on the airwaves. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little closer. I don't think people should take it for granted.
They should absolutely not. I want to thump them.
Yeah, I think we're ahead. I think we're going to win. I think we're going to win by double digits. But I also think that we have to do the work to ensure we get there. And if folks want to help us, jdvance.com is the place to do it.
The most important race in Ohio is J.D. Vance. The second most important is for the Supreme Court, and we've got to get rid of the rogue Republican justice who keeps overthrowing maps that the people's representatives have drafted. But, J.D., when you get to D.C., are you going to be willing to be hard-edged on I mean, we have to cut the size of the government, except in defense. It just has to be done. It's going to be painful, but it's got to be done.
Yeah, of course it has to be done. I mean, we're just spending way too much money. I know Republicans haven't been perfect on this, Hugh, but we have been better than the Democrats, and what we've seen the last couple of years has just been really, really catastrophic and unnecessary. I think we have to hold the line on immigration, Hugh. The border crisis has reached, I think, really country-threatening proportions. We can't go on like this for another 2 or, God forbid, 6 years. So there are a few things where I think Republicans are going to have to hang together, and we're going to have to make sure we actually get something done. A friend of mine wrote a book, Hugh, too many people use the Senate as a platform. When Republicans take control, we need to use it to govern, because that's what the country needs right now is good government.
They need to use it to govern. They need to use it, and if necessary, prepare people for and execute the strategy of shutdown in order to shrink. And the blue bubble media beats up on Republicans, but the rest of the country cheers. JDVance.com, JDVance.com. Thank you, JD. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Great. Thank you, Hugh.
United States Senator Michael Braun to begin this hour. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Pretty good, Hugh. Good to be back on.
Thank you. I bought my first house in 1985 with my wife, and the interest rate was 12.5%. I believe you had begun a small business back then. Do you want to tell people what it's like to be a small businessman or a first-time home buyer in hyperinflation like we are entering upon?
Well, that was 81, I think, when it peaked inflation about 10, 11%. Been stewing throughout the 70s due to, I think, bad policies. It was a little more systemic back then on the inflation side. But my first home mortgage was at 10% in 78. And had you tried to get one in 82, could have been close to 18%. It was already coming down due to Paul Volcker. But if you were caught in that swirl, small businesses generally don't have lines of credit. Most people running small businesses to the kind of almost complete lack of information on the other side of the aisle, they make their earning out of that business and then maybe try to put a little bit of return on investment. It was tough. When you had to wring out inflation, it took 5 years from 81 to 86 to get it back down to 2%. Plus, there wasn't near as much debt in the economy then. It was mostly the farm economy. Now government is the biggest debtor, and sadly, you don't have the tools that you had back then because you can't take interest rates up that high. And I was disappointed Jay Powell accommodated all the spending spree that we've gone through recently. Small business takes it in the chin because they don't have that staying power. They don't have the tools that larger businesses have. And we got to always keep that in mind, and it's the heartbeat of our economy to boot.
Senator Braun, the president unilaterally, I believe unconstitutionally, forgave $400 billion in student debt. That is a helicopter over America throwing out bundles of cash that hit some people and not other people. It's the dumbest inflationary thing I've ever seen the government do, and I've been doing this since 1990. What do you think about that? What do you hear about that from people in Indiana? $400 billion of new spending in the middle of an inflationary cycle.
Well, back in Indiana, where we believe in rainy day funds and balanced budgets, that was part of a state government and a general way of doing things. They think it's crazy. And they also think it's preposterous that you can then somehow spin it in a way that isn't the case. And the thing that amazes me, been here a little under 4 years, is how they think on any issue, if you just spin it a different direction or you throw some other angle at it, that it's going to be palatable, that it's going to work. Probably more than $400 billion in terms of its long-term effect. That's what the CBO just scored it at. Super inflationary, and the political enterprises that seized upon a pandemic that gave us the inflation in the first place by shutting down the productive economy and then just flooding the market with spending power. We spent as much on extended unemployment benefits, nearly $900 billion, as we did on the whole 08-09 TARP program, just to put it in perspective. And about 30% of that was hacked by domestic and foreign fraudsters. That all comes home to roost, and I hope we as Republicans can articulate it and stay on point through the midterms.
Well, I think we can. And I have J.D. Vance coming on at the bottom of the hour. I think J.D. is winning in Ohio. I actually think Dr. Oz and Herschel are winning. And I think Blake Masters is in the hunt. Joe O'Dea looks very strong to me. Adam Laxalt is ahead, and maybe Tiffany Smiley. What do you make of my scorecard?
I think you're right, and for any of the listeners out there, I was never ahead in a public opinion poll 4 years ago, and we ended up winning by 6 points. And the two big races then were Missouri and Indiana, and Josh Hawley did about the same in Missouri. We were never given credit for where we were, and you got to keep that in mind. So if people stay focused, if we as Republicans articulate better than we normally do and point all this hypocrisy out, I think it's going to be a good night for us. And we're going to win the House with some ease. The Senate, 2/3 of them are Republicans with 5 retirees. That makes it a little more difficult. But if we really litigate the case, we should be happy in November.
I think we should be, and I think we're going to get the Senate back. Which committee will you be on at that point, Senator Braun?
You know, I came here, ran a business successfully over 37 years, and I'm on the Budget Committee. It's almost a useless appendage. And now Bernie Sanders chairs it. We've not had one meeting on budget mechanics in nearly 2 years. I'm on appropriations. That's generally done behind closed doors, dropped into our lap, big bills that we got to size up. Health, education, labor, and pension. I reformed health care in my own business. You talk about real reform to that industry. The folks here that have been around a long time, and especially for Republicans, I want to cite this before we conclude here, Hugh. Independents, in my opinion, elect swing state senators and the president. They're hugging us now mostly, but we still need to do a better job of realizing that. The Dems focus in on those swing states better than we do. We get good at that. I think we're a center-right country. We just need to play our cards a little better.
Well, I think when you've got inflation roaring at 13% year over year in the grocery store, you can't but blame President Biden. But I want to step back and go to your pensions committee. If someone had told you 3 years ago, before COVID, we're going to spend $7 trillion, what would you have spent it on? I might have said, let's get the pension funds of the United States up to their unfunded pension liability. If we're going to do that, let's put everyone back and change the benefits as part of the deal, because we can't keep doing this. We have an unfunded pension liability iceberg that's bigger than anybody has any idea.
Number one, let's look at $7 trillion. That's about a little under a third of our total economy each year. $7 trillion, prior to the recent spending spree, would be just under double what we normally spend in a year in the federal government level. So that should have been, even in the CARES Act, which we did on a purely bipartisan basis due to the uncertainty. I did a couple floor speeches. Don't kill the economic patient as we try to get through the pandemic. Well, we ended up doing that. And they are enterprisers, Hugh. Rahm Emanuel always has said, never let a crisis
go to waste. Yep.
They really doubled down on this. And the fact is, we're borrowing pre-COVID nearly 20 to 25% of our federal budget for consumption. Now that's up closer to 30%. And Biden had just got a shrug of the shoulders, put a blueprint for all of us to where we'll be $45 trillion in debt in 10 years. We were $18 trillion in debt when I got here 4 years ago. We're now 30. Shameful that we borrow this from future generations and call this policy.
Do you know the cost of servicing the debt? People don't even think about that. The interest rates on that is going to go through the roof.
No doubt about it. 30 trillion times 1% is 300 billion. And 300 billion, and rates have gone up roughly 300 basis points. We've already added close to as much as we spend on defense and or discretionary domestic already with what's happened. So this stuff just isn't being pointed out. Sadly, we'll run into a series of crises. The Medicare Trust Fund is bust in 4 years, Social Security in about 10. And nobody seems to care out here. It's the frustrating part of coming from where I do to have a place run like this.
Senator, I know you're going to pass the CR. We got time for one more question here. The continuing resolution will pass. It will go to December. At what point do Republicans put on their trousers and say, we're going to have to shut the government down because this is not sustainable? we need to reduce the size of government. I mean, like by a third.
No doubt we need to do it, and I've never voted for a CR since I've been here. I vote against lots of policy that I might like, but if it's got a fake pay for. Sadly, there's too much on our side of the aisle that is still, part of the system that's been broken for nearly 3 decades. When we started putting the Gulf Wars on the credit card, the other side said, well, if you're doing that, we're going to double and triple down. And it's been a spending frenzy ever since. I don't know, but yes, we got to get tough, got to hold our ground.
Mike Braun, thank you for joining me. Always a pleasure talking with the senator from Indiana, probably the future governor of Indiana as well, but that's a conversation for another day. Ian is almost a Category 5. It might already be a Category 5. We'll talk about it on the other side. Morning, Glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live at Studio North on this, the 28th day of September, year of our Lord 2022. Good morning to you. If you're in Florida, it is almost crunch time. Hurricane Ian is bearing down. I have the Orlando Sentinel from 5 a.m. this morning. The forecast is to approach the west coast as an extremely dangerous hurricane. It's a Category 4 at this hour. It will weaken after it hits landfall, of course. The path since Tuesday has not shifted much, with the center of the hurricane likely striking south of Venice near Port Charlotte, close to where Hurricane Charlie came ashore in 2014, which also brought severe damage to Florida. It's Central Florida. It's going to move inland right over Orlando and then go out into the Atlantic. So I don't know what happens. It's going to be historic, said the National Weather Service. Much of Central Florida also under a tornado watch, as the outer bands of Ian have already produced several damaging twisters, multiple tornado warnings. It's 15 to 20 inches of rainfall coming your way, Florida. A little bit south of Tampa, so the amazing threat to Tampa it's still going to be quite the storm there, but it's not going to be a direct hit on Tampa. There had been a story in The Hill on why the Hurricane Ian posed a unique threat to Tampa Bay, and it's, of course, because it's a big bay and it's at seafall, and if you go right in there, it just gets hammered with a storm surge. But luckily for Tampa Bay, but not so luckily for the people to the south of it, that's where it's going. Governor Ron DeSantis talking yesterday about preparation. Here he is, cut number 14.
We can rebuild property. We can fix infrastructure. You can fix your home. You don't get a mulligan when your personal safety is at risk. And so we know this thing is going to be hitting the state directly sometime tomorrow evening. You still have some time, but that time is rapidly running out.
I was watching a mid-Florida newscast right before I came on, saying people have 3 or 4 hours to get going, and so check your local officials. If the roads are still open, you can take a head out of there. If you're just north of Venice, good idea. I like Venice, Florida. Been there a few times. It's a very nice area. My brother has a home on Marco Island. I think that'll be a little bit north for his retirement place, but we shall see. In other news, I have yet to hear from the Falcons about my tickets for Sunday game. Now, Art is allegedly a really good guy, and I think it's just got to be an oversight. I'm pretty sure he must have said to whoever is sitting there in the front office that, this Hewitt guy, he's a Browns fan, but he's on AM 920, and I listen to him every morning. So Arthur Blank has got to tell the team that you got to reach out to Hewitt. He's got to get down here on Sunday. And what do we have for him? I'm just saying. I also note that the Guardian playoff tickets go on sale on Thursday at 2. Now, their series will be I think October 7th, 8th. I don't think they'll need a third game in Cleveland. But, of course, I'm available to provide color commentary as well. I'd like 4 for that one as well. So just anybody out there, I have to pay face value, of course. That's the rules of the game. I can't accept free things. But just in case you're giving away tickets because nobody wants to go to these games, the Atlanta Falcons, Cleveland Browns in Atlanta, or the divisional playoff, the wild card series, actually. Cleveland will have the 3-game series at home. Don't know. They lost to Tampa Bay last night. Let's get to the real win. To the real news. Speaking of wins, hurricane wins, Nate Cohn, look, I don't know Nate's politics. I think he's a lefty. He writes for the New York Times, and he's a pretty good political analyst. He writes this morning, "Our political winds blowing in Republicans' favor again. There are some signs of a drift towards issue where the party has an advantage. For most of the summer," Nate Cohn writes, "President Biden and the Democrats had the political winds at their back. I think that's overstated, but they thought they did at least, but now they know, in fact, that that is gone. It can be difficult to discern subtle shifts in the national mood," writes Cohn, "but Google search trends offer decent rough measure. For the first time since the Dobbs ruling overturning Roe, Google searches for the economy and immigration have overtaken searches about abortion. Searches for democracy or the January 6 hearings have also fallen." It's kind of hard to keep up the threat to democracy nonsense when people are about to vote in elections and they're already voting in Minnesota and Virginia. Why have the Democratic chances fallen through the floor? Why is Nate Cohn right? New York Times, "Inflation has hit tenants hard. What about the landlords?" Now, if you listen to me with Charlie Dombeck of Key City Capital yesterday, who's a sponsor of the show and in which I've invested, Charlie points out that apartment complexes just pass the costs along. So big apartment complexes, they just put it into your rent. And you get it within 12 months of your last lease. You'll sign another lease and you will absorb every increase that has occurred. So inflation has not hit landlords hard. It has hit tenants very badly. At the same time, the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday on the S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller National Home Price Index, which for the first time in years fell by 0.3% in July from June. That's the first month-over-month decline since 2019. So the peak has been reached. Houses aren't going to rise dramatically for the depth. I don't think they're going to fall dramatically either for the length of the recession. So if you've been waiting for prices to cool, now is the time. We have a sponsor on the show, andrewandtodd.com, 888-888-1172. They handle everybody's mortgage needs. If you're listening to me on the podcast, they often sponsor an ad on the podcast, Highly Concentrated Hugh. Go over there today, because that's the first time in 3 years, more than 3 years, that you've had a decline in the cost of housing. Go buy your house today from andrewandtodd.com. Thousands of Virginia students left their classrooms on Tuesday morning to protest a set of model policies that would roll back certain protections for transgender youth in the state. That is a nonsense headline. Parents are going to be informed when their children are at school, evidencing a desire to change their gender or their pronouns. Governor Youngkin is leading the way on this for the United States. He was on ABC News in Virginia explaining his policy, cut number 7 from last night.
What do you tell critics who say this policy right here tells transgender students they don't matter?
Well, I just disagree with that thought. And in fact, the reality is that you either think that parents should be engaged in this decision, which is what I firmly believe, it's what Virginia voters expressed loudly last year, or you think that parents should be excluded from this decision. And I don't understand that view, that parents should be excluded. This is about families, and therefore I would ask everyone to please read the draft guidelines. I do recognize that a lot of people have strong views, but I do believe they're probably based on not having read the document. And the document's very clear that we want to protect students. The word bullying, I think, is used 36 times in the document. We have really, really enhanced all safety aspects to make sure that harassment and discrimination is fully admonished, and to make sure that students don't have to have any kind of harassment. But I think the most important topic here is that this is about bringing parents into a decision moment where they belong. And I just argue that it's hard to believe that previous model policy excluded parents. I mean, here we are today in a world where most important decisions are being made, and there was a policy that excluded parents, and that's just not right. Parents should be absolutely.
For Glenn Youngkin, never apologize for saying parents are going to be involved in any decision involving their children's sexuality or their decision to use pronouns, especially the gender-affirming care. Parents will have to deal with it as they have to deal with it, and they are the people who are in charge. It's a fundamental tenet of natural law and constitutional law that parents are in charge of the lives of their children. Joe Manchin got pushed off the table. What a surprise. He didn't get his West Virginia sweetheart deal. Republicans weren't going to give him that. He spent $700 billion. By the way, I had the most interesting conversation with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt yesterday. I said, the president's student loan thing is going to cost a minimum of $400 billion. And she said, you mean $40 billion? I said, no, $400 billion. She said, $40 billion. I said, $400 billion. $400 billion? Yes, $400 billion. And that was the end of that conversation. I'm telling you, they're going to get crushed. There's a new lawsuit to block Joe Biden's student debt cancellation plan, his bailout for every 50th person randomly selected in the United States, plus deadbeats. We'll tell you more about that. A lot more news ahead, including out of Russia. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh. With some rundown, please. The lawsuit to block Biden's student debt cancellation is covered in the New York Times this morning. Mr. Garrison is the lawyer at the Pacific Legal Foundation, Frank Garrison, and they believe they have a plaintiff with standing. I believe the best plaintiff would be Hillsdale or any student, one of the handful of colleges that do not accept federal funds, but they're bringing it on behalf of a student who lives in Indiana, said he expected a $1,000 state tax bill on his canceled debt. His state is one of 7 in which officials have indicated that the forgiven student debt may be taxed, and therefore he has an injury. This is into the weeds of standing law. I think the people who are injured much more clearly are people like Hillsdale College, which accept no federal funds, who are now placed at a competitive disadvantage. You can run up debt at a public university that accepts federal funds and then expect it to be canceled. We'll see. Michael Shear and Miriam Jordan have a piece in the New York Times. I'm going to talk with Michael Shear next hour about Biden is hoping small changes go a long way in immigration. That is an absurd hope. He's going to lose many, many millions of votes on the immigration decision. How Kevin McCarthy's political machine worked to sway the GOP field. WashingtonPost.com. Interesting into the fact that Kevin McCarthy has a very robust political machine working to assure his ascent as Speaker after the Republicans win the House in November, as they surely will. Democrats are basically giving up. They're walking away. They know they're going into the minority probably for a long time because Joe Biden is so infirm and does not have any purchase with the American public's imagination. All he does is spend money drunkenly, wildly. The drunken sailor comes to mind. $400 billion is the student loan tab. Picking up his tab, he left he did a dash and dine on you, and no way of paying for it, never appropriated, unconstitutional as can be. Politico also reviews that the House Freedom Caucus is not going to be a problem for Kevin McCarthy. One of the cherished dreams of the left is that the Freedom Caucus would hamstring Kevin McCarthy. Nope. From Ukraine, there was deliberate sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. People, of course, believe it was Russian. Meanwhile, in Russia, 100,000 Russian men have flooded across the borders to neighboring countries. Tajikistan, Georgia, Moldova, wherever they can get to. Not Moldova. I don't believe Moldova has a border with Russia. Wherever they can get, they're going. Every plane ticket is out of there. They're going to be drafted. The Telegraph has a long story. Why would Putin want to blow up Nord Stream 2 and the advantages it gave him? Because he's nuts. What? Yeah. Russia is announced that they won their annexation votes. What a surprise. A Stalin-esque show vote has resulted in a win for Putin. Nobody's believing it. Nobody's buying it. Israel, of all people, have rejected it, and they are in the annexation business when it's legit over a long period of time and that there is no opposition and it's strategic territory. Israel said, that's not us, that's you. Now, the International Monetary Fund is made up of global elitists. Yesterday, they denounced Liz Truss and her government for tax cuts. No word on the IMF denouncing Joe Biden for a $400 billion giveaway to this guy and that girl and that fella over there and this family over here, because the IMF is run by lefties inside the blue bubble of Washington, D.C. So they don't like conservatives. They do like liberals. So they had denounced Liz Truss, and they don't denounce Joe Biden. That's all you need to know. Liz Truss is taking a big gamble in Great Britain to try and grow their way out of the crisis. It worked for Reagan. We'll see. Saudi Arabia's crown prince, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, has been named the prime minister, usually a job that goes with being king. King Salman has said he's it, he's the guy. And the good news is the Biden administration got over its posturing about the largest oil producer in the world and the death of the journalist in Turkey. They're not letting that. Realpolitik has one grip on one part of the Biden administration world, but they're still dealing with Iran, unbelievably. I'm coming right back, America. It's